Watching Texas and USC in the Rose Bowl was the moment where I became a college football fan for life. It led me to trying NCAA Football 06, the first ever college game I ever owned, and I wanted to go over what I found interesting about this mode. Obviously, it's college, which means quite a few of these players will be redshirted. The only players who can be redshirted are true players. True players are those who don't have an RS next to their classification. At any point during the start of each season, these true players can be redshirted. That will cause them to sit out the entire year and give them another season of eligibility, which means instead of playing in college up to 4 seasons, they'll be able to stay for a 5th. This is to give them more time to develop as a player. Most likely freshmen or sophomores are the players that will be redshirted. But if you want to be wild, you can redshirt juniors and seniors. A feature that I really like is the auto-generated names. As you can see, I was able to find a roster to update the names of the players on their respective teams, but if you're unable to find one yourself, it's nice to have the game create names for every player, so you won't have to see a number where their name should go. Though one complaint I do have is the fact that you can't change player positions while you're in the season. We'll talk about when you can do that later in the video when we get to the off-season. Something I loved about Madden during this time period was the newspaper articles in the game, the national and local news that gave quick glimpses into what was going on around the league or updates about your own team. NCAA Football 06 had their own way of creating a world in the game. Instead of newspaper articles, it was Sports Illustrated. This isn't a new feature as it's been in the game since NCAA 2004, but it doesn't diminish the impact that it has in immersing you into the game. This quote is from an interview with Felix Rivero, the EA engineer who created this feature. "We thought about how you really represent what's going on in college football, and we talked about scoreboards back then, even websites a little bit, but nothing really spoke to the glamour as much as being on the cover of Sports Illustrated at the time. Throughout each week, there will be numerous articles about the bowl rankings, top 25, Heisman Watch and winners, award winners, All-Americans, bowl games, player of the week, conference standings, and the archive covers from previous weeks." Rivero went on to say, "The whole headline and caption system was kind of like the old Mad Libs. You'd plug your team in, plug in your Heisman candidate, plug in your coach name, and you'd form a sentence. And the important thing to remember is we didn't just set up stories for just your team because you could change teams at any point within the dynasty or add users and their teams. And they want a full set of stories too, so we processed every team every single week as well." This article claims that there are 618 unique stories, each story having a combination of 3 to 10 different ways the headline could be written. In the same article, they also interviewed Ben Hommiller, a producer who worked on this game at the time. This is what he had to say about the feature. "Back then, you didn't really have a lot of those touchstone moments. That was one of the first times it really felt like the game is processing what's happening on the whole in a different way than it ever has before, and is presenting these things in a way that's much more entertaining than just going to a looped screen and saying, 'Oh, these are the top 5 Heisman vote getters.'" He also said, "This feature really still holds up in a way I think we're missing in a lot of sports games right now. Just that one hub, you felt like it was seamlessly integrated into the UI that you didn't have to go out of your way to get to it. And it kind of really helped tell a quick story of what was happening in your league and let you get back to whatever else it was you were doing." Both Ben Hommiller and Felix Rivero returned to work on EA Sports College Football 25. To add upon the world building, there was in-season recruiting. This is where at the start of each season you could select up to 12 players to recruit. You can select any player at any position, but you can also look at the team overview and it will let you know what positions are needed. After selecting your new recruits, you'll be given 100 points to distribute to these players, and after each week their interest will either go up, down, or unaffected. From there, you can redistribute the points to counter any ups and downs during any given week. Keep in mind that if your interest isn't as high as you expect it to be, you can compare how well you sit amongst other teams that are interested in your prospect. They'll have 8 teams listed. Then it'll narrow down to 5. then 3. At some point during the year, usually towards the end, when you're one of the final 3 teams, you'll be able to have the player come in on a visit. Here is where you'll have the chance to give them a pitch. There are 6 different pitches and a player can react positively or negatively to a pitch. In order to find out if your pitch will be good, over the course of recruiting throughout the year, you're given feedback. This will eliminate potential pitches the player will have no reaction to or reveal which one he'll have a positive response towards. An example of it is here where the player tells you that he loves the program's prestige. Then you select that pitch, schedule his visit, which can only be on bye weeks or home games, obviously. Always a good idea to have late home games available. Then wait to see if they commit. In this case, he gave a soft verbal. That means you're in the lead, but other teams may sneak past you and steal the players the following weeks. It's not always guaranteed soft verbals commit. This player did, but I had another soft verbal who didn't. Creates a sense of a real world competing for the best players. You can gauge which player will be the best based on their star rating and physical attributes. These are not their true attributes. It can be higher or lower, and we'll get into that a little bit more in the offseason, but these are roughly what they may be like. After the first 4 weeks of the season, you'll be able to see their potential and discipline trait. From my understanding, potential is how well the player will develop during training camp. I'll go over that in the offseason portion, and how well they develop throughout the year. As the season goes on, players will get slight boosts to their ratings based on their performance, while discipline is how well the player stays out of trouble. Example here, player caused an infraction which allows for discipline measures. You can choose how long you want to suspend the player for, and if you choose to do nothing, you risk the chance of the NCAA stepping in and putting your school on probation. The results of that being they take away scholarships from your program, take away televised games, and even prevent you from appearing in bowl games. It'll be hard to be the greatest college football head coach of all time if they limit what you can do. Speaking of the head coach, when you do start a dynasty, you have the option to continue with the existing coach, all of which are named after the school they're coaching, or you can create your own. This will be important later on, as if you were to change teams, you would still be named after your previous school that you coached. This is the head coach's card. 4 years into my own dynasty, unfortunately, unlike Madden, where you can see the history and their individual records for each of the previous years, you don't get that here. Instead, it'll show the total win-loss record, the record you had for the season, your current streak, whether it's winning or losing, winning seasons, longest winning streak, record versus top 25, record versus rivals. It'll tell you who your rivals are during the week of the game, bowl record, conference titles, and national titles. Each week, you'll also get information from the dean or whoever is above the head coach in college. It's very similar to Madden, where the GM will either praise you or condemn you based on your performance for that week. There are also 2 other records below that with an image of a television and a satellite dish. The television are for games that are televised locally. It'll show you during the week if that game will be televised or not. A fun feature is that if you're not televised, then you will have no broadcast commentators during your game. The satellite dish are for national broadcasted games. One last thing I want to mention about the coach's report card, job security. The lower it gets, you risk being fired, but there are also prerequisites to be given a second contract. You'll have 3 team goals based on the school expectations. They can either be easy to get, or after putting together some consistently good seasons, they could be difficult. I did earn a contract extension the first year, but have yet to earn a second contract, which is fun because if you feel like you've reached your peak with your current team or want to have an opportunity with another college, you can leave at the end of the season if other teams make you an offer, instead of risking not getting an extension. Keep in mind, you're still going to have team goals with this new team. They will show you the team position grades before accepting their offer. It would be better if they showed your previous teams in comparison to know if you're making an upgrade, but overall, this is still a really cool feature that they have in the game. Makes you as the coach feel that you have a lot of prestige, that these big name colleges want you as their coach. I also forgot to mention, you can also be invited to go to different conferences. Similar to Madden, you do have schemes. Everything is identical for the most part, the usual run, pass, conservative, aggressive, and subbing. What's different here are the offensive types and base defenses. While yes, you can change defensive schemes in Madden from 4-3 to 3-4, this game gives you more options from 3-3-5, 4-2-5, 4-4, and the typical 4-3-3-4. The offense also has a specific scheme for it, something that Madden didn't have at the time. The choices here are spread, flexbone, option, and balanced. I'm not sure how much of an impact these schemes have on simulation, as most quarterbacks in the game aren't mobile at all. There's even occasions where they have negative yardage on the ground. I'm not sure why, but they don't value mobile quarterbacks the way they should. There are instances where there will be a quarterback with respectable numbers on the ground, but it's rare and hardly ever out of the top quarterbacks in the league. Other than the lack of production from mobile quarterbacks, the usage based on the run, pass, and subbing can significantly change the output of production at the end of the season. Be careful, as the lack of subbing can cause injuries to happen, especially if you're determined to have a bell cow. But if you want to go pass happy, you can do it. If you want to grind your running backs into dust before they make it to the NFL, you can do it too. Same thing on defense. If you want to focus on stopping the pass and get chewed up on the ground, you can, and vice versa. The options are solid for the time this game came out in. There's plenty of awards for those who are interested in earning those in their dynasties. Obviously, there's the Heisman Award. It has its own section with the Heisman Watch and the presentation when awarding the winner. But there are other awards as well. I mean, seriously, it's a lot of awards. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but there's the weekly awards that you can earn during the season for a player's individual performance. You can earn them from the NCAA or from your specific conference. Then there are season awards that are basically position awards for almost every individual spot. When one of your players earns one, you'll obtain a trophy. It'll be put in your trophy case and labeled with the player name and the year he earned it. This will also be where you will store your bowl trophies, by which there's a lot of them. That's not even taking into account the rivalry trophies that you can earn. It's impressive for a game that came out in 2005. There's also the All-Americans, the best of the best, but if you're not the best, maybe you're the best in your own conference. There's a section for each conference in the NCAA. You can still earn first or second team here, but freshmen can only earn All-Americans. Can't earn that in the individual conferences. Now that we've gone over the majority of the regular season, it's time to talk about the off-season. There are 8 steps to go through. Let's begin. This is where you'll be able to distribute the money the school earns. It's given in percentage points, so you don't really know how much they earn, but you will be able to spread it out any way you want between these 3 options: recruiting, training, and discipline. They're all self-explanatory. Recruiting allows you more points for the upcoming recruiting season. We'll get into that when we get there. Training gives a chance for your players to improve more during the off-season, while discipline gives you more points to use throughout the year to discipline your players. The less points you have, the harder it is to keep the NCAA from putting you on probation. There are many different ways to optimize the budget based on what you want to achieve. Have a younger roster, increase training. Is your roster filled with juniors and seniors? Increase recruiting. There's different combinations, but those are 2 basic ones that I've seen. This is now step 2, where the players declare for the draft or graduate. Not every player graduating will be in the NFL from my experience. Players who earn an All-American or whatever conference you may be will be chosen to go, or if they're highly rated. That is, if you choose to import your players to Madden NFL 06. Some players might want to transfer to another school or declare early for the draft. This is where the recruiting points come into play. You can talk these players into staying. There's a gauge showing how likely it is that they'll leave or stay. The more points you add, the more likely they'll stay. Also, even if they look like they'll stay, they don't always stay. There will also be times that a player will give you multiple attempts to talk them into staying. It's a great way to continue building the world and gives a sense of urgency when you fail to bring someone back. It makes the 3rd step of the offseason even more important: the recruiting. This is where you'll be spending most of your time in the offseason. You're greeted with a map that's mostly grayed out. The yellow states are pipeline states. That means 3 recruits from the previous 2 years came from those states. Players from pipeline states do have a slightly better chance of being recruited. This is something I didn't know until I found this guide created by Evil Dave from GameFAQs. The link will be in the description if you want a deeper dive into this mode, as I'm not going to go into every tip and hint that's available, but I will go over the basics. You will have 5 weeks to recruit and give up to 25 scholarships for the next season. Keep in mind, if you had in-season recruits, it will subtract those scholarships out of the 25. You most likely won't use them all. The team overview will show the positions that you need. If it says 0, I tend to focus on filling in positions that have no freshmen or sophomores. sophomores so that they'll eventually take over in the future. How do you choose these new recruits? There's plenty of different options in the sub-menu. You'll have your state prospect. These will be the available prospects from that state. The green indicator means that they're interested in coming to your school. The JUCO acronym means that they're a transfer student. They're not a freshman for this particular player, he's a junior. They can also be seniors or sophomores. Keep that in mind when you're recruiting players. Your current target will be any of the prospects that you're attempting to recruit. There will already be players on here that are committed to the team if you recruited during the season. The way they're listed will be similar in all the other areas, the star rating indicating how good of a prospect they will be compared to their peers, along with how interested they are in joining the team. Here's the national top 100 players, the best of the recruitment class, with Elite 11 and blue chippers. As you can see, 5-star, interest rating, and the position that they play. If you don't want to limit yourself to just these top 100 players, depending on the prestige of your school, you may have a better chance widening your net by looking at all the prospects from 5 stars down to 1 star. Even the worst player is better than a walk-on no star. If you don't want to look for diamonds in the rough, you can always go after players who have already garnered an interest in the team. All players on here will have your school on their list. You may not always be their number one team, but you at least have their attention, making it easier to recruit for the upcoming year. The final page is the returning players. That's the roster that'll be returning to the team for next year. Now let's move on to how to recruit these prospects. I talked earlier about how the attributes aren't their real ratings. What I mean by that is that you can scout these players and reveal their true numbers, giving a better representation of what they succeed in as a player. Most of the time, they're not always as good as their numbers, but on some occasions they do match or even succeed their previous numbers. You can use this as a way to decide on who you want to recruit, but it does take points to view these true numbers. Depending on if you used a lot of your scouting points, you'll be using them here, calling, visiting, or sending the house to players you're scouting. The more you invest, the more likely their interest in your school will rise. To the right, you'll see all 6 pitches that I talked about during the in-season recruiting. Here, you'll get multiple opportunities to find the right pitch. There are wrong pitches that will negatively impact their interest to the school. To keep it as simple as possible, find the positive pitch, use as little amount of points as you can, then send the house. The way I do it is by doing an assistant coach phone call and selecting any pitch. Once you find the positive pitch, you can continue to use it multiple times. Depending on how interested they already are in your team, you can either send the house multiple times or spend less points if you already have a leg up on the competing schools. That's pretty much it for the recruiting. You do that for 5 weeks. It's simple enough that you don't need to spend a terrible amount of time on it, but engaging enough that it does require you to think a bit about who you want to recruit. One last note about the recruiting period, it does allow you to see your recruitment class, the usual position, 5-star, but now you can see where they were ranked amongst their position groups. You could have seen this on the recruiting class before, but now it's laid out with the rest. While the final note would be the ability to view how well your school recruited against other schools. We jump straight into step 4 of the offseason after recruiting, and that's changing player positions. This will be the only time that you'll be able to change the position of players. You can't do that during the regular season. I didn't go over this in the recruiting, but there are athletes in this game as a position. This means these players won't be assigned a position until you give them one. From my experience, they tend to be quarterbacks, but not always. They're not the only players who can change positions. Everyone is fair game to be changed into any position that you want them. Step 5 is now training camp. You don't do mini games or drills, but you do see the improvements of players that are not from the incoming recruiting class. This is where the potential trait comes into play. The better the trait is, the higher chance of development. The problem about the potential trait, the only time you ever see it, is when you're recruiting them. It's not available to see after they're on the team. There's really not much else to this step. You can see who had a breakout, who improved the most, or who improved the least. That's about it. Then we move on to step 6, which is cutting the roster down to the final 70 players. You can be over the roster limit during the recruiting period, but you must be at or under 70 in order to start the season. It's self-explanatory. If you're over 70, cut players that are either seniors who won't see the field or lower rated players that won't out-improve the players above them on the roster. If you're under 70, don't worry about it. Finally, we're at the depth chart. Get your best players in the starting lineup Very simple and straightforward. That was step 7. Step 8, begin your new season. That's it. That's everything that I can think of that's important to Dynasty Mode. I know I missed some stuff like creating your own school and being able to add them to this mode, also the ability to include Division 1 teams. I also didn't go over the player cards that keep track of the player stats, but doesn't show what schools they came from if they transferred. It does keep track of how many awards they won. I hope you enjoyed. I think this is one of the best Dynasty modes in the NCAA games, and hopefully this new one that's coming out soon is just as fun. From what I've seen, it's almost a complete copy of this game with major improvements to the mode. Who's ready to get their school spirit on?